Welcome to Book Club, Afikra Book Club. This time around, we have Sahar Mustafah, author of The Beauty of Your Face, who's here to talk to us today. I think we can go ahead and dive right in. Sahar, I am so honored and so happy to have you here on Book Club. I absolutely loved your book. And let me tell everybody a little bit about you and your amazing accomplishments. So Sahar is the daughter of immigrants. Sahar Mustafah explores her Palestinian heritage in her writing. She earned her MFA in fiction from Columbia College, where she was a Follett graduate scholar. Mustafah is a Willow Books Grand Prize winner for Code of the West, which was named one of the 25 writers to watch by the Guild Literary Complex of Chicago, and is a member of Voices Protest and Radius of Arab American Writers. Her debut novel, The Beauty of Your Face, was named a notable by the New York Times Book Review and a finalist for the 2021 Palestine Book Award. It was longlisted for the Center for Fiction First Novel Award and chosen for Los Angeles Times United We Read. Sahar also writes and teaches outside of Chicago.
Hi, thank you. I appreciate that. Yasmin, I'm so happy to be here. We were just talking earlier. I did want to just pause for a second, just for a land acknowledgement. So, I'm in Illinois. I'm in a suburb about 25 miles outside of Chicago. So I just wanted to honor the original stewards of the land, and that is the Potawatomi tribes, among others. Today's Indigenous Peoples Day. So that makes it even more special. I appreciate it.
Lovely. All right, Sahar. So before I was or right after I read this book, I wanted to kind of watch and listen to you talk about it. And to begin at the beginning, I understood that the genesis of this book was very much inspired by certain events in the US. And you had a certain goal in mind by the end of this book. And I was thinking about the book cover, which you see on the screen here. And there were two versions of this, I think. But in both cases, it was similar. It was this illustration, graphic illustration of a woman with a hijab. And it got me thinking about whether or not this book cover helped you achieve what you wanted to achieve. And do you think the right people picked up the book? Looking at this book cover, what do you think?
Oh, that's such a great question. So I'm thinking, Yasmin, the other version might be the British version. Is it the blue version where it is very distinctly a hijab? So that has been really amazing to see when it moves from publisher to publisher. So, for example, the British publisher was very clear this was going to be a woman who is hijabi, right? When it went to the Italian publisher, it was this very ambiguous cover. And these people, you can't really tell even, what their ethnic background is. So I'm curious to see what's going to happen in Turkey, which has also picked it up. And then in Dubai. So in the Arab world. So we'll see. With the American, so with the first publisher, with Norton, it was just the image of just a silhouette of a woman, which you could make out in this profile. And I have to say, it didn't quite convey, I think, what I had initially imagined. I didn't want it to be, so Muslim looking, and not that is, a terrible thing, because obviously this is about, representation. I did want it to be beautiful. And I feel like this one did both of those things. So that you are probably going to engage with this community, but just the colors and the sort of fading out of the hijab. And I have to say, Yasmin, I don't know that everybody sees a hijab when they first pick this up, because, I also thought, is that going to be, will that produce the effect of, well, I don't want to pick it up then, which of course then goes against, what was one of my intentions, to go with a pretty big publisher,
Yeah.
So ultimately I loved what the final draft was the color palette was different from the first. I think this is so vibrant. I think people don't forget it. And, I've had, just wonderful messages, about it, comments. There was one person on Instagram humorously did her makeup palette in these colors. So
Oh,
it
wow.
felt like,
That's pretty cool.
it's been on, a journey, on its own. So yeah, I would have to say, ultimately, I was pleased.
Okay. It must be so exciting to kind of wait and see how each publisher is going to take their own twist on it.
Yeah, and nerve-wracking too. I was lucky because, I could come back to them and say, well, quite frankly, that profile feels maybe more white, Caucasian, so it wasn't quite, there for me, and I didn't want it to be that ambiguous, So yeah, overall, I was pretty pleased.
I'm glad. I really like the cover. I like the colors, as you said. And you're right that you can't distinguish the hijab profile from the side, especially how abstract it is. Mm-hmm. But once you start reading, you realize,
yes.
I actually don't know at which point I realized it was.
Okay. That's really interesting.
Yeah, I don't remember when it clicked for me. I don't remember. But yeah,
that's really cool.
I'm glad we get to see like different versions that will come out. And I think so I'm also a writer. I write poetry, and I always imagine at the very end that if I was to let this out in the world, and somebody to take this piece of writing, would I want them to get my message, like a distinct message, or would I want them to see it the way they want to see it, or to have their own different perspective, or to take away whatever it is that they take away? So I wanted to ask you how you are, not only about this book, but in general with your short stories and maybe with your future writing projects. Do you usually have that thing in mind, or do you just put it out there and see what they think?
I have to say, if I was always operating from theme, Yasmin, I think that would be kind of a hindrance to my creativity. So I'm definitely, I feel this responsibility of representation, and I think it's also a privilege. So what I put out in the world is basically what I would love to read, and stories that I did not have, when I was a young adult into, adulthood. I was not, really aware of too many Arab American authors until post-college. Unfortunately. So my exposure came because of becoming a writer. And I would say that my first encounter with an amazing author who made me feel like there was a space for our stories, Palestinian American, is Naomi Shihab Nye. And I had the privilege of meeting her. And can I tell you, Yasmin, my goodness, she basically connected me with my Arab American community, and that would be via Radius of Arab American Writers, which continues to exist. I actually served on their board for many years.
That's amazing.
And so when I met her, and actually it was at an English teacher conference, a national conference, and I was just like, I was like a groupie, like, the way you would feel like about a rock star. And I remember just squeezing the arm of one of my teacher friends, and I said, oh my God, I think that's Naomi Shihab Nye. And so, we rushed to her. And when I got to see her again, she gave me information about where I could submit my work and who I can connect with. And it was just so, I'm forever indebted, I'll leave it at that. Yeah. And so, but this idea of, what are the themes? What do I want readers to come away with? I actually I'm forced to think about those things because of the publisher. So when they are packaging this, they very much want to know, how can we, market it, especially when they're thinking about like book club discussion questions and things like that.
Like this one.
Yeah. Well, no. And, that's good. I think all of that is important, but I don't think about that immediately because, again, I just think if I'm writing to themes, I don't think, for me personally, I think that's going to interfere with authenticity. I think it's going to create these critics, and then I'm going to be worried about than censoring and worrying about, well, does this fit into this particular theme? What I'll tell you this, what I'm mostly concerned with is, am I inflating stereotypes? So that's probably my number one thing. And I'm lucky because I have great writing partners, and who, we're kind of sensitivity readers for each other. One in particular is Susan Moadi Daraj, who I just adore, and she's an amazing Palestinian
That's
American
amazing.
writer. Yeah. And so we're careful about what are we putting out in the world that, again, is just sort of perpetuating those stereotypes. But in terms of theme, I think that is inevitable, but I don't start there. So, with these stories, it's I haven't seen them. I haven't read them.
Speaking of stereotypes, one thing that stayed with me after, or maybe it took, like, I was kind of, it stood out to me that you kind of chose to twist the typical amazing, like, Arab mom that goes through everything, kind of holds the family together, is more patient than she should, and then the typical dad that's very toxic and masculine and macho and not at all sensitive and has nothing to do with raising the kids. And you just completely took these roles and you're like, not in this story. It's going to be the other way around. I wonder, did you do that on purpose? Did you do that on purpose? Were you conscious that you were doing this kind of reverse stereotype thing?
So I imagine these characters pretty naturally, Yasmin, but I also knew that when they started to sort of materialize, I knew, okay, so I'm about to go on this journey. So, here we go. And so I was very, very aware of how I was fleshing them out. And I have to admit, I'm sure that on some, if subconscious or not, I knew that I was battling against those stereotypes. And writing Baba, for example, was just so amazing. When people ask me who's my favorite character, I'd probably say it's him. When they ask me who's the most challenging, they think it's the shooter, and it's not. It's Mama. It's Mama, and I know that she's difficult, for some readers, for some of our communities, but I think ultimately, I hope I've written her with compassion. So, she's not, this villain. She's someone very much who's suffering from mental health issues, which I'm very much interested in exploring. But I also know, as you mentioned, just those, stories of the toxic, dark, swarthy, Arab males, and that toxic patriarchal relationship with daughters. And I'll tell you that it was enjoyable to push back, against that. And the thing with Baba is, if folks have not read it, he's flawed, which is even more interesting to me and what I pursue. So these are still, he could easily then have become another maybe kind of two-dimensional character. But I also am very tender, with my characters. I want to give them nuance, and I hope I achieve that.
I think most of the characters were complex. I didn't see anybody in the light of, like, even the protagonist in all moments of her time, like being perfect or being horrible. They're all like dynamic and human, just like us. And I think you did a good job in showing that for everyone, or like the main kind of characters. But were you at all afraid? Because you seem to be very, like, you talked about responsibility and all of that. Were you at all afraid of pushing boundaries within your own community, not in the general community, like in the global community, which this book is obviously took that bigger platform. It's not just for the Arab community or Muslim community in America. Were you at all afraid of things going wrong within your own community? And I wonder what went on in your head in that kind of area.
A great question. So I wanted to acquire an agent because I wanted this to be in the greater, mainstream. But I was definitely concerned about the immediate reception, by my Arab and Muslim community. In fact, I'll be honest, Yasmin, I was very nervous. And I thought, is this going to be a book that they're going to embrace in this, again, experiment of expanding the narrative, around our communities? Because I avoided the very, very super pious and, infallible Muslim, woman. I think I managed to avoid that and maybe even dismantle that, because we know that at one point she basically has to, face off against a community that's trying to keep her silent about abuse that's going on. And that's, again, that complexity, that nuance that I'm trying to add, in addition to, of course, constantly raising the stakes, from chapter to chapter.
Yeah.
So that's also the writer in me. I'm like, okay, we need to keep pushing Afaf, right? And keep pushing, her to her limits. But I know that this is also realistic, because we are so mired in these vile, and just awful vitriol around their communities. And I'm like, okay, and let me just add this, that makes it seem like, kind of like this honor, abuse and all that. But I have to say, I knew that her very authentic challenging would ring true, to my readers. And it didn't at all dismantle the love that she had for this community of women who embrace her. And if anything, I think what I've done here is, represented Muslim women in, I think, the most amazing way. This is the first time she feels any sense of belonging, at this point in the book. And to me, that also feels very feminist, if I'm going to, begin to, give this a scholarly, critical lens. So yeah, I guess, what confirmed for me that I think I might have, done a pretty decent job is when readers would reach out and say, finally, and thank you for basically getting it right, is what one reader said. And I still get goosebumps, Yasmin. I'm like, and so what does that mean, getting it right? Well, because, maybe for a long time it's been told wrong, whatever that means. I think we need to have certainly various narratives, but I think this has been pretty unique.
Would you have cared if people were like, at the end, I didn't like Afaf, your main character, or would you not have cared?
You know what? I'd be interested in, why that reaction, emerged, in the same way that I was so interested in, when the pandemic hit, it was wonderful because I started connecting via Zoom, with book clubs. A few of them, their first book was mine, which was amazing, so I would get to come on. There was one book club, Yasmin, from the East Coast. And this was, I think they were largely a Dominican American family. They were women and they were multi-generation, but the older generation could not forgive Muntaha, the mom. They were not having it. So the younger one were like, wait a second, mom, grandma, like, let's take a step back, let's look at her life. And I just thought, wow, that's really incredible. Because I knew that she would basically strike a nerve, or she would be maybe an entirely new character. So I think I'd like to have the conversation, but I wasn't concerned. And, of course, that's easy to say now when so many people have loved Afaf, that some have told me, I became so close to her. I didn't want this book to end, but I don't mind being challenged, because I do want to make sure that it's not because, again, I've added to those narratives that have also been controlled by white writers, and white media.
Yeah. And speaking of that, I think I heard you talk about Adiche's single story
Yes.
In a previous talk, and I was really excited to hear you talk about that because when I was reading this novel, your novel, I imagined, those Russian dolls that keep opening up and more come out. I imagined the chapters like that, where I came to a point where I was like, oh, but let's see what's going to come now. Like every chapter was like this whole new world, whether it's not only the time frame, the time loops, it's the characters themselves and what they go through and how they change. And it just shows you how circumstances and all of that impact. So I guess I saw that a little bit as your talent in telling also short stories come in. And I think you mentioned that once, but I feel that and I want you to answer this question that I was wondering. Did you feel that like you had to write every type of character that represents the Arab American community? And is that why you felt like you needed to create different spaces and avenues to be able to do that? And you kind of did that even within the same characters, but just by showing how complex they are. Did you feel that you covered enough? Did you want to represent more people, like type of people that you have in mind? I don't know.
Yeah.
Did you even think about this?
Yeah. I was definitely thinking about representation, but not at the expense of good storytelling. So I really, I'm not going to introduce characters just to check off the boxes, right? And I think this is related to what I was saying about not writing to theme. I will say that when I think about maybe two major parts or components of the book, I wanted to create a character like Neda, who very much is an absence, but then that absence sort of becomes a character, a presence unto itself. For me, she really represented, what I call the failed experiment of assimilation. I definitely wanted that representation, and because that's what we lived. So I very much remember those stories of girls basically running away. In fact, my own older sister, Hala, one of her best friends, she just showed up in this, is in the early 80s, showed up on our doorstep just sobbing because her sister had basically run off and she never came back, as far as I know. And I just, it sort of haunts me, and so I definitely wanted to give space to Neda's story. But the sort of on the other side is Afaf, who she it doesn't fit in anywhere really. So even if she wanted to be accepted by white community, they were just not going to give her that space, and then she was even rejected by some of her Arab community members. And then the other community would be the circle of women, for sure. And I
love that.
Yeah, and I wanted
the community.
I wanted to produce the character of Kokeb. She's probably another of my favorite. I'm like, that beautiful friend, because, if we're going to talk about themes, I think about how people have described this book, and I think about how it's also about friendship and how friends can save us, and I have to say, it was just so lovely to write someone like Kokeb, between her and Baba, they're the ones who, kind of lead her path to Islam. And it made me think, this is what good friends do, especially when it feels like other people might have abandoned us, even in our immediate families, So
family comes in all shapes and sizes.
Yeah. And especially because when we look at Majid, who is another wonderful character. In fact, Yasmin, when people are like, are you like Afaf? I'm like, no, I said, I'm more like Majid. I was the straight arrow. I followed the rules. I was, teachers loved me. And I think, maybe I was doing it again on some subconscious level, but definitely not in the forefront. But when I saw what was happening, again, I just wanted to make sure that those renderings were authentic as I could get, based on my lived experiences and imagination.
Yeah, but Kaukab came also at a later time in the novel, and that goes back to the whole Russian doll kind of metaphor. that
Yeah.
you just you kept us on the edge with surprises and important people and important events that will continue to happen as the book like progresses. Like it didn't end, or like, yeah, I just wanted to like say that even.
Oh, I appreciate that.
Like you always kept it coming with new things. But I think you mentioned Majid, or no, you mentioned about yourself not being FF. And I think I heard you say this more than once about this not being in like autobiographical biographic novel. But one similarity that you pass down to your trait is the teaching profession. So you're a teacher.
Yes.
And and from that, I think you meant to give it to her as like kind of a beautiful thing to do, because you obviously love teaching and you love your students and you love what you do. So I guess what I wanted to kind of figure out with the whole teaching thing is, why did you choose to make her a teacher, and why was it related to the whole community building? Was it what teachers and her future, what she progresses to do as going back to the community, going back to that circle of women? Was that it?
So thank you for saying that about teaching. I tell my students that you can cultivate more than one life. And for me, my first life was teaching. I think I'd always been a writer, but not professionally, except, into adulthood. And I'd been teaching for like maybe 5 to 8 years at that point before I started to think of myself as a writer who could publish. I think it was a few things. So my experience was so unlike AFF's. I had teachers who advocated for me. There was maybe one teacher with whom I had a horrible experience, but otherwise they were constantly pushing me forward. I think having AFF become a teacher is her way of making sure that all students were seen, because we see it as early as when she's 10 years old, when Neda disappears. Teachers only started looking at her again because of the spectacle of a sister disappearing, right? And then later on, oh my goodness, that chapter when she becomes a teenager, which, can I tell you, that was probably the most challenging chapter for me and section to write. Her teachers, she was just invisible, and if she wasn't, she was getting in trouble. And even then, they were not really seeing her as this human being, and also someone who probably, needed help, but not the kind of artificial, that's based on all these horrible stereotypes that they have of her family, members. So I think I wanted to have her pursue something that would allow her to change somebody else's experience, which is why I also have a few Arab students in her class, and she just feels a special, connection to them. And I think, I just think, teaching just in general is such a noble profession. I mean, we use that, but I don't think that that's a cliche. And I just think that, it also relates to school shootings, and so there's that. Okay, I knew that my shooter was going to enter a school, which is where, this is supposed to be a safe place. This is supposed to be a place where we broaden the minds of young people. It's also a place where we're supposed to protect them. And of course, I'm sort of challenging that, in the worst ways. And so being able to write about that. So the framing, which is the white shooter who enters the building, that also is informed by the crisis drills that I've had to do, the active shooter drills that I had to be a part of. But the difference is, Yasmin, is that we were planning, I think typically we think of like a young person bringing a gun to school, someone who's on the brink, right? Who's been marginalized. But then of course, we don't dismiss that it could be an adult. But this is motivated by hate. This is motivated, by fear, right? And to me, that was very unique, which is, of course, connected to why I wrote it to begin
Yeah.
with, which is because of, the hate killings
Yeah.
of Yusuf Abu Salha and
So there's the distinction. Yeah, I get it.
yeah.
Like the
But
mental illness versus, just like a
oh
hate crime.
yes, which of
Yeah.
course is incredibly. I think when it is, I was so glad because when they finally called it and indicted the killer of those young Muslim people in North Carolina, I think we all felt vindicated, that it wasn't going to be written off as someone with mental health issues. But I also appreciate not treating the shooter in my book as a monster, because that's also very dismissive. We need to look at how do we become radicalized in this country.
Yeah. As a reader, I felt that you wrote all the characters in a way without you trying to tell me you have to like them or you have to hate them. It was just like, this is who they are. That's how I took it away. So that's why I asked you if you cared if Hafaf was liked, or if or other people were liked, like was Nadas, and what you said about Muntaha too. So I guess you'd have people at both sides of the spectrum.
Yeah, and I think this. When people talk about unlikable characters, I think it's kind of an interesting argument. I think I'm interested in complexity. I'm interested in human beings making terrible choices. I'm interested in human beings triumphing, when they've been struggling. So how about this, Yasmin? I've also been thinking about empathy a little bit differently too, because, it's so wonderful and easy to package this book as, oh, this is going to make people empathetic, to the Muslim Arab American experience in this country. When I think, you know what, I don't know that you need to try to walk in my shoes, which is how we usually will frame this idea of empathy. How about you just hold space for me in my experiences? How about you just read about this, think about where I'm coming from, maybe how things in your immediate community, in your state, in your country have contributed, to the issues that someone like Afaf has had to face and combat. I think that's where I kind of stand. So if you felt super close to Afaf, I tell you, that makes me so happy. It warms my heart. But if you liked her or not, I guess I'm going to say I'm going to put that concern down. I don't think that even challenges us as human beings. I think I'm more about, if you felt uncomfortable, let's look at that. Let's sit in that discomfort. This is what I tell my students. We need to have maybe these kinds of conversations, so that we can grow and then possibly change. I don't know if you saw that interview about Sahar Mustafah, hates happy endings or something. In fact, I think they had to change it because it just sounded so awful. But I said, well, here's the thing. It's, I don't like the endings that, are, a pretty, a pink wrapped bow kind of thing. What I'm about is the possibility of change. That's always been, what I hope for, without thinking too much again about, theme. I like to end in a way that feels realistic. And I also hope I accomplish that, with Afaf. I'm not here to solve problems, that I don't think is the burden of the writer. But I think the artist, the writer, we turn to them to ask questions, to engage, in our problems.
Yeah. And I like, as this is not related to the book, by the way, this next thing I wanted to talk to you about, or maybe it is more related to you as a writer. And this might be interesting for other writers. And you tell your students that you can pursue more than one avenue, but how do you have the time? Like, how do you balance these two things? Like being a teacher whom you said does all these things in the community, and they are the superstars of the community, and writing and doing these interviews and book clubs in the evenings and mornings of your weekends. How do you balance all that?
I think I'm so passionate Yasmin, I'm going to make time. In fact, I feel like I'm more disciplined during the school year. I've been experiencing the last few summers. I get so excited for summertime and then I'm not as productive. And I think, well, maybe I don't need to be. So maybe I do need to just kind of be, read, write, when it's coming to me. But I also know how privileged I am, quite frankly. So, being a Palestinian American writer, I know that I'm sitting basically in a place that, I'm not losing electricity. I don't have, bombs overhead. And I'm going to take advantage of that, so I've been thinking a lot about that a lot more too, as I continue to write and put books out into the world. It's definitely work, sometimes hard work, but it's not a chore, So this is just my natural.
What's not a chore? The writing or the teaching?
The writing,
or both?
the writing,
Okay.
the writing.
It's the outlet.
Oh yeah, yeah, and of course, teaching is going to economically sustain me. Books have been great, but economically, I could turn towards writing now, and that's another thing I feel fortunate about.
Yeah,
Would
you at one day decide you're going to fully focus on just producing more writings and books?
I would love to. I think I would still have to teach though in some capacity. So I know there are writers who do it full time, but I would say, if I could also still engage in creative writing in a youth setting, I would love that. So to be able to, facilitate young writing experiences, that would be awesome. Which
would be awesome.
It would move away from, kind of the strict, academic curricular things that I'm responsible for now.
Yeah.
But, I don't feel like I don't have time. So I don't ever feel like, if, I just wasn't teaching. Because like I said, I look at, I gauge my summertime productivity. I'm like, I think I'm good. I think I'm doing well. I just think I would love to resign and retire just to be done with schedules and deadline, you know what I mean? And grading and things like that, which,
the admin
to me,
stuff,
those are the chores. Yeah, for sure. But, I also wake up very early. So I'm up at like 4:30, because that's when I'm most, I think, alert and creative. And to me, if I want to, devote myself to this, then I'm going to do what I need to do. And
were you
I'm
always a
also
morning person?
Say that again.
Were you always a morning person, or
yes.
Okay.
Yeah. And I continued. I'll work, maybe late afternoon and night, but that's only maybe to research, to revise. And I was going to say, I don't have young children, so I have 2 adult daughters. So that also, has made it easy, for me to just get into my loft and write, whenever I can and want to.
Yeah. What are you working on now? You want to tell us?
Yeah. You know what? All I'll say is that it's hopefully going to be a novel. And I'm also working on a short story collection. And that one, because it feels a little bit more defined, is actually inspired by tatriz. So the, Palestinian embroidery. During the pandemic, I got to meet virtually Wafa Ernem, who is the tatriz and tea creator.
On Instagram?
She's wonderful. And so on Zoom, I returned to just minor, simple kind of tatriz patterns. And I loved it because I felt like my brain was scrambled like during the pandemic. And so I was able to continue to listen to stories audible, but then I could keep active with my hands.
You actually learned
yes.
And that's amazing.
Yeah. And I actually did it overseas when I was at Friends Girls School. That was like an art class. So I was doing it there too. So I kind of returned to it. But then I started, she had this wonderful cohort. So we spent, so many months for in a larger scale design. But we weren't just, actually the emphasis was on lectures. So she shared with us the origins of each of these patterns and motifs and, Yasmin, I was blown
what they
away.
symbolize. And,
Oh my goodness. It was so gorgeous that, of course, as I'm listening to her, I'm taking notes. And that's me, the nerd, because everybody else is just like darrazing while she's talking. And I'm just like, I was just so, entranced. And so what, of course, ends up happening in my brain is I think about these motifs and then I start seeing characters or I start seeing places and then it took off. So each one of these short stories is inspired by a particular motif or pattern, and it spans
that's interesting.
Pre-mandate Palestine to the present, and also Palestine and into the diaspora.
So it begins like early 1900s.
Actually,
and then it ends
I don't even think
today?
it's going to be chronological. I think it's going to jump around even. I don't think it needs to be chronological.
That's so exciting. It's going to be historical.
Yeah, I'm really excited. And so I've got a few stories already going. In fact, 2 have already been published or are forthcoming. So
can you tell us where we can read them?
Oh, yes. The first one is called The Peacock, and that one is on the markaz.org, Markaz. And please, those of you who are joining, please support the Markaz. They're just like Afikra. They are devoted, to expanding exposure of Arab writers and artists.
Nice.
Very wonderful. I'm just so indebted. They took the story, and that one is actually based on a sex worker in Ramallah. Where I know you're
interesting,
but it stems from this motif. The other one is forthcoming. That one is actually in an American literary journal, but all this, of course, will go on my website, once these things, but the Markaz is already
That's exciting. That's an exciting new
Thank
project.
you.
I'm really looking forward to reading it.
I appreciate that. So I hope that comes to be soon. But there's this pressure to write a novel, so that I have, like I said, something in the works, but boy, I tell you, it's just so much more natural for me to write short stories. And for some people it's harder, but for me, the compression of story just is manageable. Yeah.
Cool. Very, very cool. That's very exciting, Sahar. I'm excited to read it.
Thank you. I'm excited too.
I want us to move to the Q&A.
Yes.
But before I do, just like one last question, because your new project is somewhat historical. I wonder if you read Suad Amri's Mother of Strangers.
You mean this book that I was going to? Okay, but guess what? I literally just got it from bookshop.org.
Okay.
So I'm so excited. So yes,
it's a historical. Yeah. I think you're gonna like it. Oh, she's coming on the book club, so that should be also.
Oh, wonderful! Is that soon?
Yeah, that's very soon.
Okay, so I'll be looking for it. I want to. This is my next in my queue. So
awesome.
Very excited about that.
Okay, so let's do the Q&A before we log off for today. So you already answered this one. What are you reading right now? It's up ahead in the queue. Okay, let's see what other things we have in store for you. If you could shadow someone for a day, past or present, maybe as part of the research for your next book, who would it be? Who would you shadow?
That's a really great question. You know what? I know that she might not be as maybe active in classrooms anymore, but I think I would probably say Naomi Shihab Nye, because she to me is like the consummate educator, because she takes her art right into the classroom, and I know that, she has been, a visiting writer and teacher. And I think I would just love to see how students and young people connect to her. I think she'd be pretty fascinating, just off, the top of my head. That's a good one. I feel like, I'm going to think later on and be like, oh, I should have told Jasmine that. But in my heart, she's the one who, I guess,
the first person comes to mind.
Yeah, I think because, again, being an educator, and she possesses such an amazing grace. So she writes about Palestine, and you want to engage her, which I think is also so necessary. But I also think of someone like Susan Abul Hawa, who recently wrote, Against the Loveless World, who was completely unapologetic about writing about Palestine. And she would be, of course, someone else I would also recommend. And so I think there's just so many wonderful representatives, Palestinian Americans,
And you're one of them.
Oh, I appreciate that. Thank you so much.
Okay, here's the next one, Sahar. What do most people misunderstand about your work?
Speaking about being Palestinian, I've had this interesting comment come up a few times. And this is from both, Arab Muslim and then, non-Arab Muslim, typically white audiences. Oh, I thought this was going to be a book about Palestine. I thought this was a Palestinian book. And I'm just like, I don't know what that
Where'd
means.
you get that idea?
And I have to say, so I was very heartened that my publisher did say Palestinian American story of, blah, blah, blah. So that made me happy because I very much want to celebrate and acknowledge, that particular identity. But I think that's problematic because to me, that feels like it speaks to this, you're either this or that, or here's what I'm expecting because you called it Palestinian. So already I'm like, well, good. So I've dispelled that narrative then. Great.
It might be exclusive also.
Yeah.
Be exclusive to a certain group.
It bothers me because again, it's just, I feel like then there's more work to be done, with that sort of maybe dismantling. So I would say that that's probably maybe the greatest misunderstanding because otherwise I would say, Yasmin, really quickly that it was more, educational. And I don't always like to be like, well, you're going to learn this by the time you finish the story. We don't want it to be pedantic, but a lot of messages are about, I had no idea. I never knew, especially when we get to the 9/11 chapter, just what it felt like to be visibly Muslim. And that feels good, so it was more or less like elucidating or trying to get as close as possible. Because of course you could never, 100% understand somebody else's lived experience. Right.
Yeah. Like you said, it's that kind of space that you were talking about, just that space for those perspectives. Okay. So I wonder if I can just move over and give somebody else a chance to ask a question, because I could keep going with questions, but I wonder if anybody else wants to ask Sahar a question from the audience while you have the chance. Okay, so Hashima says this was wonderful and thank you. No questions there.
Thank you, Hashima. Nice to quote see you in the space. I really appreciate it. Really appreciate your support.
Thank you, Mona.
Thank you, Mona.
Thanks from Mona. And just to let everybody know that this will definitely go up in our afikra library, on our podcast, book club series, on our YouTube. So you'll be able to share it with those who missed it or those who you think would very much like it. All right. So Sahar, I think we can put a pin in this for now. We can wrap it up. We very much thank you for coming and chatting with us.
I really appreciate it. And thank you to everyone who tuned in. I really am always so grateful, for these spaces. This book continues its journey, it has just absolutely humbled me and amazed me. And afikra, you are a part of that. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Sahar. Excited for your next project. Looking forward to it. Hope you have a great day. Thank you.
You too.
Bye.
Be safe.
Bye-bye, everybody.